My son-in-law had no idea I owned the company he ran as CEO. He saw a quiet old man in a faded tweed jacket, a nobody who kept to himself. One evening he invited me to dinner with his wealthy parents, and they slid a thick white envelope across the table, offering to buy my absence from my own daughter's life. 5 minutes later, I began tearing their entire world down to the foundation. Before I continue, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you believe arrogance always comes with a price. The Chicago wind cut through my thin tweed jacket as I stood outside the city's most exclusive steakhouse, watching valets open the doors of cars that cost more than most houses. I looked down at my scuffed boots, 15 years old, clean, but unmistakably worn. I could have bought the entire restaurant with one phone call. Instead, I parked my battered pickup 3 blocks away and walked. I'm 69. I learned long ago that wealth is a quiet shield, and ostentation is a loud target. My name is Lawrence Weaver. My life has been defined by 2 things: the logistics empire I built from nothing, and my daughter Rachel. She married Sean 3 years ago, and from the beginning I saw through him. The calculated ambition, the way he measured people by their watch or the cut of their suit. He believed I was a retired blue-collar man surviving on a pension, that my small suburban house was the ceiling of my life's achievement. I never corrected him. I wanted Rachel loved for who she was, not for the trust fund sitting quietly in her name. Tonight, Sean's parents, Howard and Cynthia, were in town celebrating his promotion to CEO of Apex Innovations. I accepted the dinner invitation because I needed to see exactly what kind of family my daughter had married into. Inside the private dining room, Howard sat in a charcoal suit with a gold watch gleaming like a weapon. Cynthia wore silk and pearls and a face pulled tight with judgment. Sean swirled his wine and didn't stand when I entered. He gestured toward the farthest chair without a word. Rachel wasn't there yet, fixing her makeup, he said. The moment the water was poured, the assault began. Cynthia asked how my little house was holding up in the winter, emphasizing little. Like she was talking about a doghouse. Howard bragged about their Amalfi Coast vacation, looked at my boots, and asked what exactly I'd done for a living. I told him the truth. I'd spent decades managing freight, moving boxes, dealing with trucks. I just left out that I'd eventually owned 10,000 of them. He laughed, shared a superior glance with his wife, and filed me away as an uneducated laborer. I said nothing. I drank my tap water and watched their arrogance with the patience of a predator watching prey step into a trap. Then Howard reached into his jacket and slid a thick white envelope across the table until it stopped in front of my plate. Inside, he said, was a cashier's check for $20,000, a relocation fund. The condition was simple: invent an excuse, move to some low-tier retirement community, and vanish from Rachel and Sean's life. My poverty, my lack of polish, was a social anchor dragging down Sean's rising trajectory. A CEO of Apex Innovations, he said, could not be seen with a man who looked like he belonged in a soup kitchen. I didn't touch the envelope. I looked at Sean and asked if he agreed. He looked me dead in the eye and said yes, that his career required a certain image, that a man running a company like Apex simply couldn't have a father-in-law who looked like a janitor. He had no idea that the empire giving him his corner office and his tailored suits belonged, in its entirety, to the man he'd just insulted, through a blind trust he'd never once thought to question. Rachel walked back in just then, smiling, oblivious. Before anyone could speak, I slid the envelope into my jacket pocket. Howard and Cynthia exchanged a victorious glance. They thought I'd surrendered. I stood, calm and deliberate, pulled a single crumpled dollar bill from my pocket, and set it on my empty plate, payment for the water. I told Rachel I had a headache and needed to go home, kissed her forehead, and walked out. The second those brass doors closed behind me, the quiet old man vanished. I called Stephen, my corporate attorney and the architect of my blind trust. I told him they'd taken the bait. I ordered an immediate forensic audit of every account Sean had touched since the board appointed him CEO. The hunt had begun. By the next morning, I was in Stephen's 52nd floor office, the city glittering below. Stephen had been my attorney for 30 years, loyal and terrifyingly thorough. He already knew why I was there. 10 years earlier, after my wife Clara died and left me alone with a toddler and crushing medical debt, I'd bought one broken-down delivery truck at a police auction and turned it, through 20-hour days and skipped meals, into an international logistics network worth hundreds of millions. When my heart could no longer take the pace, I placed my 70% ownership into an irrevocable blind trust, scrubbed my name from the public registry, and disappeared into a quiet life. 2 years ago, the board hired a rising star named Sean to run the company I built. A man who believed he'd conquered the business world alone, never suspecting the man he mocked for his boots owned the fortress he stood in. I ordered Stephen to lift the veil on the trust and reinstate my name at the highest level of corporate clearance. Within minutes, the system confirmed it. Lawrence Weaver was back in absolute control. Then I handed him the envelope. I told him that was the exact price my son-in-law had placed on my dignity, and I wanted a full forensic audit of every account he'd touched. This was no longer a family insult. It was corporate warfare. For 48 hours, a team of elite forensic accountants tore the company apart. On the second night, the lead accountant, Valerie, found it. Not a simple error, but a deliberate bleed. For 18 months, Sean had built a network of shell companies under fake vendor names, signing off on contracts for services that never existed, funneling millions out of the treasury into offshore accounts. He'd forged approval signatures and doctored quarterly reports to hide it all from a board that trusted his polish. Then Valerie traced the money further. It wasn't sitting offshore. It was flowing back into the country through fake consulting fees and family trusts, with Howard and Cynthia as the beneficiaries. Their Amalfi vacation, their custom suits, their diamonds, 2 imported luxury cars, and just 2 weeks earlier, $4 million wired from an Apex emergency fund into Cynthia's holding company to buy an 80-foot yacht docked in Miami. They had used my stolen money to insult my dignity and try to buy my silence. Stephen asked if I wanted Sean arrested by morning. I said no. An arrest was too quiet, too clean. I wanted the same public humiliation they'd tried to hand me. I ordered a full racketeering case built against all 3 of them, their assets traced and tethered to the fraud, and I told Stephen we'd let it all detonate at the corporate merger gala Sean was throwing that weekend, while he stood on a lit stage believing he'd already won. 2 days later, Sean showed up at my house uninvited, in a tailored suit, disgusted by my modest living room. He dropped a stack of legal papers on my coffee table, an NDA, and a full renunciation of any claim to Rachel's support, meant to silence me and erase me permanently. When I asked what would happen if I refused, he threatened to cut me off from my daughter and any future grandchildren entirely. I signed it without a flicker of emotion, handing him, unknowingly, written proof of his own extortion. Before he left, he warned me not to come anywhere near his gala, that security would throw me out if I dared show my face. That night, Rachel showed up on my porch, soaked and shaking. Her bank cards had been declined. Sean had frozen every account and called her a liability. Worse, he'd demanded she sign over the private inheritance her late mother had left her, threatening to end the marriage if she refused by morning. I understood immediately what he was really doing, draining the company for the gala, taking his stolen millions and Rachel's last safety net, and vanishing to a country with no extradition treaty, leaving her with nothing. I didn't tell her who I really was that night. She didn't need a corporate titan. She needed her father. I promised her the nightmare would be over by the end of the weekend, and she believed me completely. The next morning I went straight to Stephen and ordered a total executive freeze on Apex Innovations, locking Sean out of every account he didn't yet know he'd lost. Then I had Stephen schedule a mandatory shareholder disclosure meeting, not for a Tuesday boardroom, but for Saturday night, in the middle of Sean's own gala. Stephen also picked up the phone to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, laid out the entire forensic dossier, and arranged for a tactical unit to wait, invisible, in the hotel's service corridors until my signal. 2 days before the gala, I ran into Howard and Cynthia at my local hardware store while loading bags of soil. Howard laughed, told me it was fitting to see me hauling dirt, now that his brilliant son ran my company. Cynthia said people of my class belonged exactly where I was standing. I let them talk, let them dig their own graves with their own mouths, paid for my soil, and walked out without a word. The night before the gala, I pressed the bespoke midnight blue suit I'd kept hidden for a decade, the one I wore the night I first stepped down. With every pass of the iron, I smoothed away the humble old man they'd mocked and prepared the armor of the man who actually owned the fortress. The gala ballroom was a cathedral of crystal and gold, thick with orchids and champagne. Sean stood at its center in a flawless tuxedo, utterly unaware his executive authority had been stripped 24 hours earlier. Howard and Cynthia glided through the crowd flaunting stolen diamonds and a stolen watch, oblivious to the federal agents already positioned near every exit. At the scheduled minute, I pushed through the mahogany doors in my midnight blue suit, carrying a leather portfolio holding the entire case against them. The room went silent. Older board members recognized me instantly and went pale. Sean's smile collapsed. Howard and Cynthia intercepted me, hissing that I'd humiliated them by daring to show up, ordering me to crawl home. I said nothing. Sean shoved between us, reminded me I'd signed away my rights, and ordered security to drag me out. Before the guard could touch me, Stephen stepped out of the shadows. The head of security recognized him instantly as the legal face of the anonymous Founders Trust, and froze, then stepped back and bowed his head. Stephen walked to the stage, tapped the microphone, and announced an emergency shareholder disclosure meeting, revealing that the anonymous founder of Apex Innovations was in the room tonight. Sean, certain this was some billionaire coming to bless his leadership, straightened his tie and smiled, until Stephen pointed directly at me. I climbed the stage. Sean's face turned to ash. I opened the portfolio and, without raising my voice, walked the entire ballroom through the fraud, the shell companies, the forged invoices, the wire transfers, as the screens behind me lit up with evidence. Then I showed them the yacht deed, the luxury cars, the jewelry, all paid for with stolen corporate money, and named Howard and Cynthia as knowing accomplices. The crowd that had been toasting them 10 minutes earlier physically stepped away, leaving them standing alone in a widening circle of disgust. Sean scrambled onto the stage, begging, claiming forgery, weeping, promising to fix everything. I told him his explanations were worthless. I fired him on the spot, stripped of title and authority, in front of everyone who mattered to him. Then I raised my hand. The mahogany doors burst open, and a dozen FBI agents marched in. Sean was cuffed on the stage. Howard bolted for a side exit and was tackled by waiting agents. Cynthia collapsed, screaming, as a federal agent stripped the stolen necklace from her neck and dropped it into an evidence bag. All three were marched out of the hotel in handcuffs, while the elite crowd that had adored them an hour earlier watched in cold silence. After the doors closed behind them, I found Rachel at the back of the ballroom, trembling. I opened my arms and she collapsed into them, finally understanding the full shape of her husband's betrayal, that he'd never loved her, only the money he thought he could steal. I told her the truth at last, why I'd hidden my wealth, why I'd wanted her to be loved for who she was, and not for a fortune, and that I was sorry I'd let a predator get close enough to hurt her. I promised her it was over, and for the first time in months, her tears were tears of relief. 6 months later, Sean took a federal plea deal and was sentenced to 10 years for wire fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering, trading his tailored suits for a prison jumpsuit. The trail led straight to his parents, their yacht seized, their cars towed away, their accounts drained to nothing. High society dropped them within a day of the headlines. The country club revoked their membership. Their friends stopped answering. Stripped of everything, they were forced into a cramped, unheated apartment on the edge of the city, applying for jobs no one would give them, turning on each other in the wreckage of a marriage built on nothing but stolen money and mutual blame. 6 months after that, I sat on my own front porch at dawn with a cheap cup of coffee, in the same faded flannel I'd always worn. Rachel came out and sat beside me, peaceful now, the fear gone from her eyes. She once asked why I didn't move into some sprawling estate when I could buy almost anything on earth. I told her a house is just wood and glass. A home is a record of memory, and no amount of money could buy the one we'd built here. Back at Apex, The toxic culture Sean built was gone, replaced by leadership that valued people over greed. I stayed in the shadows, letting the company run honest and clean, with Rachel's future permanently protected, behind an invisible wall of security she'd never have to think about again. I watched the sun rise over the quiet street, my daughter resting against my shoulder, and understood that the real victory was never the empire or the reckoning. It was this, an ordinary morning, safe, whole, together. True power, I've learned, never needs to shout. It simply exists, quiet and unshakable, in a life well and honestly lived. The lesson in all of it is simple. Wealth used as a weapon of arrogance eventually destroys the ones who wield it. Real power is quiet integrity and the patience to protect the people you love. Never mistake a polished exterior for a good heart, and never mistake kindness for weakness. If this story moved you, like the video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from.